Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Tuesday, November 7th. November! Yeah, it's getting cold. It's getting late in the year. Christmas is coming. But you know what? Never mind. Duane, since Saturday night, I've been quite happy, quite smiley. And I have to say thank you, GSP.
Yeah, that was a surprise. And I said there wasn't much of a chance there. And I'm sure in the city that you're in, the GSP, George St. Pierre, of course, we're talking about recapture while winning the middleweight championship of the
middleweight.
UFC. That was. Yeah.
The States have Muhammad Ali.
You were up in weight.
Yeah, and we have George St. Pierre. So it's our Muhammad Ali. All right, now, let's talk about that ball that is round that's being kicked on a grass surface. MLS Cup playoff. What a game on Sunday at BMO Field, Duane.
Well, I guess. What a something. It was
the tunnel. Well, halftime was quite interesting. Oh, that tunnel. Let's start there. The controversy, Sasha versus Josie.
This all stems from, and I talked about this. We weren't on the air, obviously, yesterday because basically I've been working overnights and I passed out. So I'll own that one. But nonetheless, look, I think that this all stems down to Josie's headspace since the first leg there's been something wrong there. He's been complaining about the fan behavior and the booing and that sort of stuff and sort of saying he who protests too much is whatever that saying is. I keep forgetting the saying. I've tried to do that in the show a couple times, but he's he's saying he doesn't care, but then he's clearly caring, and then he gets in a brawl basically in the tunnel, and who pushed who first, who knows, but the reality is we can't be having that happen.
Yeah, let's just start with this, and then we'll go where it started, how it started. But in the tunnel at halftime, what seems to be the case now, after looking at the data or looking at the multiple reactions and comments about that confrontation in the locker room, kind of feels like the New Rebels kind of ambushed Josie on that one. I have to say, having been to Toronto BMO Field a few times and walking next to that tunnel, that fans area right next to it, and the locker rooms on each side, they were
finally got their money's worth.
Even maybe they were a little scared because some of them, like Verone, I just remember Verone's name being like on that plexiglass, being almost squished, and he's getting pushed. But the New Rebels players did not have any business to be where they were at halftime. I have to say, they have to go out of their way to confront a Josie Altidore, and that has no place in sports, right? You have separate locker rooms, separate ways to get to your locker room with no ways of interacting with each other for that specific reason, and it happened.
Well, here's the thing. Maybe it has no place, but MLS seems to give it a place, and this is what I was saying. I was on another show last night, and this is exactly what I said. This is all just a symptom of this aggression that comes out in the playoffs. And this is the natural conclusion of it. And what, we want 1970s hockey out here? Like, what are they doing? Like, why is this okay? And I guess maybe in their mind people are talking about this. I don't know. But the aggression, the amount of physicality that happens in the playoffs, it's only going to naturally create situations where passions run high like this. And I guess the one thing I will say about this is anyone who's, we're going to talk a little bit about NASL and all that sort of stuff with people that always argue that MLS players, there's no intensity, there's no pressure. Well, no, clearly when there's that much passion out there, something's going down. But yeah, I guess that from a TFC perspective too, it's almost for the best that people are talking about this, because it takes away from the fact that they almost bloody blew the whole season with probably their worst game they played in 2 years.
Yeah,
well,
no.
you know, maybe and maybe not, but they couldn't. The fact that they've now got 2 straight playoff games without scoring, although they did score and it should have stood, but
Yeah, it was
whatever. And the refereeing
barely
was,
offside. Yeah.
yeah, the refereeing was not good, but that's neither here nor there because that's just what it's going to be the rest of the way. And you know, people are talking about this now rather than the fact that they didn't play well. So I guess that's one way that you can look at this thing. And they do have, you know, the international break is probably coming at a good time for, in a weird way, for TFC this playoff streak, because unlike last year where they were rolling and everyone was excited to get going, this is a situation where everyone just kind of needs a little break right now from them in this city, because that stadium, Kevin, it was there wasn't like frustration or sadness at the end of that game. There was anger. People were angry that what they were seeing, because I think that they'd like, I mean, and that's irrational on some level because, you know, obviously fans aren't owed anything by a performance, and things can happen in a sporting competition, but it just seemed like people were just angry. Like that was not a fun atmosphere by the end of that game.
No, and I think it's a combination of Chris Penso's refereeing on the second game as well. And just go back to Friday. What was I talking about, Duane? I was talking about how in the playoffs, in this year's 2017 MLS Cup playoffs, we've seen referee not call everything at all, barely call anything. And you see that rise, that escalation of accepted tolerance on tackles, and the violence escalates, and then you get tackles that are a little iffy and they still get accepted, and it pushes the tolerance of what do we accept or not during a game. And the players feels like the referee is not taking the right disciplinary steps, not making the right calls, which leaves the players wanting to make justice for themselves, which leads to what happens between Sasha and Josie, to what happened to the tunnel. So I think it's all related. It all stems from the lack of calling the game how it should be called.
Yeah. I just don't get it. I dare someone to give me a logical reason why they do this. And they do this every damn year. And this is just,
it's like it's worse this year.
Like,
it feels like it's worse. Sorry,
Pardon me?
I was going to say, it feels like it's worse this year, though. I remember last year, maybe it's because Montreal and Toronto Montreal was implicated in Toronto as well, deep, and we're maybe looking at other things. But between you and I, if I go back to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as this year. I don't know if it's just me and recency bias, but it feels like it's worse this year.
Well, look, I think there's part of what you're seeing from Toronto too is a lot of frustration, because they are a highly skilled team, regardless of whether you cheer for TFC or not. You have to understand they're a skilled team, and for the past 2 playoffs, they have been. That's a tactic that gets used against them. It's a tactic that gets used against the regular season too, but in the playoffs it gets intensified. And I think that their frustration is boiling over. Why in hell are we letting, you know, our skilled players just get kicked? Like, why? Why is that okay? And with all due respect, there was a perception here in Toronto that Montreal's tactics was to try and play physical with Toronto,
well, it's to
and
foul,
knock
to
them down and chop them down. So there was a perspective here.
Yeah, but the fouls were not like as violent. They were like regular fouls to stop transition, to stop the movement, and stop the ball carrying on through the midfield. And
Sure, I know what you're saying, though. Yeah, certainly this didn't happen like this last year. There's no doubt.
No, there were
As
little
bad
fouls.
as Montreal, Toronto have gotten over the years. They've been brawled in the tunnel yet.
Yeah, and you know there were some fouls that like a little knock here and there in the back heel or something to make you fall, but not like lunges, not pushes. I think this year, and it's not just in the Toronto New York game, by the way. It's across the board. First question, Patrick Vieira was asked after his elimination with New York City FC. He's like, "So Patrick, what do you have to better for next year? Where's your growth going to go from? What do you think you need to do to better the team?" He's like, "Yeah, better refereeing." So there you go.
Well, yeah, and that's. Look, it's not good, and it's something that the league. I'm on the MLSsoccer.com site right now, as I often do the show. I usually bring it up in case there's something jumping out at me. And the title for Extern Radio yesterday, and with all due respect to those guys who do that, they're in a tough position because they're a league show. But it's Brouhaha at Buimo becomes playoff lore. Well, no, it becomes a playoff disgrace, not lore. calling it lore suggests that this is something that you should desire, and that there's just this attitude out there that I think really needs to be challenged at some level. And other than shows like ours, and I'm not trying to tip our hat here, there's just this bizarre acceptance of it in North American sport, and I think maybe that's what it comes down to, because this isn't just a soccer thing, clearly. It's just that soccer and playoffs really are, it happens in other parts of the world, but it's not as common. So we're seeing it here and sort of it's standing out. But you look at hockey, you look at basketball, basically the rules change in the playoffs, and that's a bizarre thing that I just don't understand and never have at any level. And at some point, someone has to call people out at that, because there's nothing positive about this. And anyway,
no, but you're right.
Let's get back to the game.
No, but we bash all the other sports, and we bash the NFL a lot, Duane. For me, the National Football League is the only sports where refereeing never changes. It's the same from day one of preseason to Super Bowl. You do like a holding penalty, you're going to be called even if it's the last minute of the Super Bowl,
Well, no, I agree with you. Yeah, baseball as well, but you're talking.
Yeah,
about
but baseball
sports.
is you're talking about like sports, not just pastimes.
Strike or ball, regardless. Although that said, in the playoffs in baseball, you tend to see strike zones change, and there's all that sort of stuff. But I mean, yes, if you tag the guy, you don't. But that's the way it should be. Like, you're playing a game, and it has to have a set rules that are maintained consistently. And obviously, there's going to be human error here and there, and I don't have a problem with human error. What I have a problem is human indifference, and that's what I see in here. There's indifference to the rules now. It's not mistakes. They're just deciding in their mind that they're going to enforce them at a different level once the games become more important, and that is completely illogical. But at any rate, I want to just talk quickly about this from a Toronto perspective, though. They can't get sucked in like this. Now, I don't think Columbus, and we're going to have lots of time to preview that series, so we're not going to worry about it too much today.
We got like 10 days.
Yeah, but so no sense worrying too much about that. And look, there's no the correlate. Yeah, people are probably scared. Well, there's no probably about it. People, I suspect if you survey TFC fans right now, you'll probably get like a slight majority thinking they're going to lose to Columbus based on what they saw against New York. And based on the fact that Columbus, outside of they lost, obviously, the second leg, but I wouldn't put too much stock in that. They'd gone 10 games undefeated before that. So that's going to be the whole narrative here in days ahead. But they can't get sucked in like Toronto did like that. They can't lose their cool in that way. You can't get a red card in the tunnel. And obviously this red card is, Javinko's out and Josie are out for the first leg. That's going to be a factor because they couldn't keep their cool. And that's a challenge for Greg Vanney over these 10 days. I mean, you think about that too. Josie and Javinko aren't going to play for like 20 days now.
20 is becoming a lot, right? It's not ideal, no. It might be good to make sure that they don't get injured, but you do lose some rhythm, right? You do miss a step when you're off not competing for 20 days. Yeah, they'll be practicing and they'll be scrimmaging, but they won't be competing. All right, so it finished 1-0 Red Bulls, but because of the away goal, Toronto FC moves on to their second consecutive Eastern Conference Finals. Speaking of Eastern Conference, NYCFC 2, Columbus 0. Duane, it got close, and NYCFC almost had the chance to tie it up, but Zach Steffen and his love affair with his post continues, and Columbus sneak through, even though it was a little bit more difficult than anticipated.
I believe that's actually I'm going to tip my own hat there. That was the score I picked. I thought it might get to 4-3, but at any rate, yeah. Look, the Crew have their whole narrative going on that they are the team of destiny. They're
Save the
living
Crew
out in real time.
People want to see Anthony Precourt get booed in his own stadium while he is being handed the MLS Cup while they were hosting the MLS Cup final. Will it happen? I don't know, but that's one of the narratives people want to see.
I suspect that anyone outside of Houston, Seattle, and Toronto wants to see that. Obviously, those three fan bases want to see their own club win. But if you're not a fan of those clubs, you're probably cheering for the Crew from this point forward, and I understand that. Again, we have lots of time to preview that. In terms of the game of the weekend, I think that that's the natural inclination of a team that has a big lead headed into a second leg. You start to sit back, and then once it gets to the point where, oh, this is interesting, then, it's hard to turn it back on. I will say that the fact that the Crew, if you want to look ahead to the Eastern Conference Final again quickly, they did lose, and they lost some of that momentum that they had heading into this. So both of these teams have a bit of a challenge in the legs ahead. TFC did handle Columbus pretty well in the regular season, although I will say that the Columbus did actually beat TFC once very early in the year as well. So lots of time to preview that one, but obviously the big upset, although it wasn't really that big of an upset when you look at the lineup that was left on the field for them, was the Dynamo getting through. Yeah, that's the very unexpected team in the Final Four.
For the second year in a row, Houston Dynamo making I don't know how to say this, what I was going to say, so I'm just going to say it another way. So Houston just eliminated Portland for the second year in a row, destroying their dreams of an MLS Cup for the second year in a row by the Dynamo. This time it was a come-from-behind performance at Providence Park for the Dynamo. After conceding an early goal, they were able to come back and score Remick with the equalizer, and then a kind of laser, but it wasn't really a laser. It was just a shot from distance, but with the tricky bounce, it went in, and the Dynamo has got a 2-1 aggregate win with the 2-1 victory. First leg finished 0-0. Dynamo, surprising a bit, yes. We're surprised because it's a team that usually doesn't travel well, and they were not able to take advantage of their home game in last week, but were able to perform on the road and now find themselves with a trip to Seattle for the Western Conference Final.
Yeah, and look, I think, and I'll give Extra Time Radio some credit for this, because they challenged the whole Houston's not playing well on the road narrative heading into this in the preview of the game that they ran out there by pointing out that it wasn't that they're playing great on the road, but they, over the last 7 or 8 games after the horrendous start, they were playing horrendous at the start of the year, the first half, but in the second half of the road schedule, they were averaging just a little over a point per game on the road. So they actually were just right in the middle of the pack road-wise. So that's, I guess, something that maybe we need to revisit now that they've got the playoff win. That said, Portland's pretty beat up in that game, and they're missing a lot of key pieces. A lot of questions in Portland, though. Going to be a lot of reflection. I think at some point soon, Porter might find his job in jeopardy. This is a team that they obviously won the MLS Cup.
2 years ago, yeah.
Great, and that's going to keep your job for a while. But the funny thing about MLS Cup, and we know this, is it's not the best team that wins it. And always, often it isn't. So the fact that they had a bit of a run that year and got some luck there, I don't know if that necessarily takes away from the fact that they've missed the playoffs 2 of the last 5 years now, and they've bombed out in the playoffs when they've gotten there earlier than they would have expected. So Seattle, that said, and we talked, I think, about this, and I've been talking about this for a while. In some ways, they're arguably the favorite to repeat now. They have the championship. Toronto seems to be slumping. The other 2 clubs that are still in the mix, they're both, we talked about the Crew and their nice form and all that, but they are a team that no one was expecting to win a championship or compete for a championship up in this type of year. And the narrative is nice, but it's not necessarily backed up by logic. I still think TFC is going to win this. I think that they'll figure it out during the break, but certainly a lot more questions than answers here in Toronto, and there's a lot more mystery of the 4 teams left. You could make an argument for any of the 4, and other than Houston, you can't really make an argument for Houston other than the fact that maybe it makes no sense, and often the MLS Cup winner makes no sense. There's your argument for Houston. Kevin.
Houston won the World Series. Houston might be winning MLS Cup, and with the year Houston have, good for them.
All right.
It was like the hurricane, you got that I was talking about the hurricane that Houston had, right? And now it's a little bit of relief, maybe.
Yes, no, I did, yeah.
All right, cool.
There you go. All right,
let's take a quick break.
Talk about Pirlo, too.
Yeah, all right, let's talk about Pirlo before the break, and we'll come back and talk about NASL for a second. Andrea Pirlo retiring from professional football as a player.
Yeah, and this has been expected, but, I'm choosing to believe and to remember that he did not play the last 3 years. Which
at least the last one.
In many ways, he didn't. So
that image of him at the back post wondering what's going on will be what I remember from Pirlo in Major League Soccer.
Yeah, that's there's an image on MLSsoccer.com, obviously wearing NYCFC colors, but when I think of Andrea Pirlo, he's either going to be wearing the Azzurri colors or he's going to be wearing black and white. He finished there, but this is a Juve player and an Italy player, and that's where I'm choosing to remember
and his
Pirlo.
Substitution made no sense.
Like
it made no sense when he came on. 89th minute, you're down, you need a goal. You need some fresh legs. Yeah, you would like, okay, maybe Pirlo's going to come in and deliver some nice ball in the box. Well, didn't happen. Missed the box by about 20 yards. Every ball he was trying to boot in. And it was quite the letdown. And the last 6 minutes of his career were pretty much like this year. He barely played the last 3 months. And it was clearly a thank you by Patrick Vieira and NYCFC to put him in this game. And maybe a realization that we're not going to win it, even though we only need 1 goal. Kind of needed 2. Let's just put Pirlo in to make sure that that he gets a little bit of playing time before he retires. And of course, the next day he announces, "I'm retiring from professional football as a player." So yeah, it's the substitution of Vieira. You know, we talked about Vieira and how he manages his team during the regular season and how he's been great. On the playoff for the 2nd year in a row, it's been terrible.
Yeah, it's not something he's used to, and I guess that's the only thing you can argue with it. It's in a playoff situation for him to put him in like that. I guess the argument you'd probably make is that maybe you're trying to get a dead ball situation for him. It's the one thing where father age doesn't play as much of a role, but yeah, it was a victory lap, and I guess maybe you're recognizing at that point that the comeback's unlikely and trying to get it out there. Look, again though, great player, maybe. Hopefully even the last of his type in MLS as well, because he clearly was coming over here as the quote-unquote retirement league. And
he was like, what? I have to run? I have to travel? What's this thing? It's not what I thought it was. It's not what I was expecting.
And look, I will defend the big name European that came over at the end of his career, the idea of that for the MLS 2.0 era. It was what was needed to bring MLS to the point where you're now talking about it being fully into the 3.0 era. Those numbers get thrown around so much they're almost cliche now, but there is something there when you talk about that, and bringing in those big names and helping push the sport and the popularity of the sport to the next level was something that was important. So I will defend that practice. The David Beckhams, and David Beckham had a nice little MLS career actually when you look at it.
He played what, 6 years? 6 years, a few championships? No, you're right.
Yeah, no, he was fine. He played well. He was never the best player in MLS, but he was a good player in MLS. And that's, I think, something that gets overlooked sometimes when people just want to look at that as an example. But Pirlo clearly was an example of a team either not fully understanding, or a team and a player maybe not fully understanding what was required of MLS. And I think to defend NYCFC a little bit, they really did adjust with their player personnel after that first year and brought in some players that actually made a lot more sense for the league. And, in the regular season, at least, that's a club that has been amongst the best in the league over the last 2 years. And Vieira, he recognized at some point that even though it's Andrea Pirlo, he's a legend of the game, that he wasn't a legend anymore, and he needed not to play for the success of that team. And now that problem, which it really was, I think, at the end, a problem, is off his hands. And assuming he is back next year, chooses to be back next year, he will have another bit of money to spend. And New York City FC is going to have a very interesting time replacing that, because clearly they have the money. I mean, That said, there's been some suggestions that there's another Manchester midfielder that on the end with City that might come over to play for the new City, and we'll see what that's Yaya Toure, of course, which I find intriguing, but maybe that's my bias talking.
Yaya will destroy Major League Soccer. Quick break. We come back with an NASL update.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
You think that's what they're saying to each other? Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. NASL's injunction was rejected on Friday. Denied.
Yeah, it was Saturday, actually, because we were all sitting there waiting for it. It was very early. I can still remember it coming down. But at any rate, yeah, we don't quite know what it means. We know in terms of the immediate future of the NASL. I have trouble suggesting, as we talked about with Kartik on Friday, I have trouble believing that they're just going to wave the white towel right now. It was a Hail Mary that didn't work. There were some minor victories in the judge's decision if you look at it carefully, but ultimately, like in terms of the argument, there were some things that they said that they're interesting. Basically, the judge said that there was fire, but there wasn't. There was some smoke there, but she couldn't see enough fire, and they had to see fire for her to jump in and supersede, the USSF's naturally given right to govern its sport. And that's essentially what it came down to, is that the USSF is a governing body, and as a governing body, it has the right to govern and enforce rules.
Yeah.
And even though there was some suggestion that there was, again, some smoke around some, and the collusion's a strong word to put it. And that's
when you talk about collusion, you need evidence. You need black and white evidence that shows a correlation between certain actions and a certain result that led to that collusion feeling, and you can actually prove a collusion, and that's usually not the case. It's hard to prove something when you don't have a paper trail, when you don't have hard evidence, proof that it actually happened with intent and motive as well behind it. So because of those reasons, it was always a long shot for this litigation effort to work. Now, there's a rumor or consensus or the feeling is that NISA, which we never really talked about, but it's a Division III type of league that was created by Peter Wilt and partners a few months ago, that's looking to exist next year. Well, apparently NISA and NASL will be both on their own or maybe together, who knows, a Division III or IV league next year.
Yeah, I suggest what we're going to see here is we're going to see clubs like Indy 11 probably look towards, and like Indy 11, I suggest will survive because they are, they're established in the community now. But I think that they might be looking for USL, and USL might be eager to have Indy 11 come join them. But you're going to have clubs like FC Miami and the Cosmos for sure. The Cosmos are a weird one. They almost went belly up once already. For the third time, of course, and they were saved with him. Yeah. Anyway, they're not going to USL. Neither of those clubs. So if they want to continue to exist, there's going to have to be some creative solution, and perhaps Peter Wilt's league there, which we haven't talked a lot about on this show, but maybe we can get Peter on in the days ahead. He's been a guest on the show a few times before. That might be the solution for them. I think NASL as its own thing might be done, but that the teams that exist in NASL right now might find a way to continue on in the bizarre patchwork that is the pyramid of North American club soccer.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think we are seeing the realization, and I think it's going to be driven by the sponsors too, that Division II tag is important for the sponsors, for the venue administrators, for the cities itself, when you're looking at the bidding process to either have a team or to welcome a team that needs a new home. That Division II, Division III, Division IV, whatever branding was useful for that. Now we're getting to a point where it's probably not, if it's not going to happen for 2018, you will have less revenue, and the sustainability of an ASL is undefined for 2018. So no, a lot of questions, not a lot of answers, but I think you're right saying a few clubs like Indy 11 might find a way to survive and maybe get that golden ticket to the USL.
Yeah, well, we know the Deltas are pretty much dead in the water at this point too, which is too bad there, and that is going to create an opportunity for someone to chase Mark DeSantos, which is one of our topics that I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about. And we know North Carolina is going to USL for sure. So my initial thoughts and what I messaged out on Saturday when the news came down was was, look, don't dance on their grave, because really, yes, there are some highly annoying Twitter presences out there that are sort of associated with NASL that like to harass and bully to get a point off. And they absolutely dirty the waters, muddy the waters, that's the phrase, for everyone's perception of those leagues. But the vast majority of fans just want to support a team in their local community, and they don't really get into the politics of this. And certainly when I tweeted that message out there, not to speak out of turn, but there were a few people that are work in NASL or play in NASL that reached out to me back channel to thank me for the messaging behind that and expressed their concern about what their future is. And that's really who you got to think about here. Is it's not good if this league disappears completely. It's not good if these teams disappear completely, because people are going to be losing their jobs. People are going to be losing their clubs, and that's not something I'm cool with, even if I believe that the NASL as it currently exists, and certainly the antagonistic aspect of the NASL, has kind of run its course. And that's, we haven't really paid a lot of attention to the NASL this year, unlike past seasons. And it's partly because I have fatigue about the amount of conflict that's just constantly there. And clearly it just seemed like this is a league that was just looking to fight at this point by the end. And they weren't really...
the lack of... we're not the only one there, though, Duane. The entire... remember a few years ago, there was some NASL shows, and there were podcasts, and there were websites dedicated to it. This all dwindled down in 2017. There's barely anything left. I think that attrition has really cost that league a lot of fans, a lot of supporters across the board, and I think it needs a new branding. I think it's not stupid. I think, just go back to NISA for a second, what Peter Wilt saw, the writings on the wall a few months ago, and decided to create this project. I think NISA will be the new branding of the NASL. It'll make a lot of sense. You put the teams you want to keep in there. You start off fresh without that antagonistic attitude, and maybe you go somewhere a little further, and maybe you go along to get along.
Well, precisely. Look, I understand that there is a limitation for sure when you call yourself a Division II team compared to competing with Major League Soccer, but these clubs were never going to compete with Major League Soccer, and they weren't. They simply weren't. They did not have the if their dream world where promotion and relegation existed, they still would be teams that would be coming into MLS and immediately dropping out because they didn't have the resources to compete at that level. They just simply didn't. But look, knowing who you are is something that I think is important for NASL or whatever form it's taking moving forward, because you're going to need some stability in that league, and you're going to need owners and operators that are committed to operating soccer at a Division II level, which is important to the overall structure in many, many ways, and can be effective and can thrive in markets if done right. India is a great example. So, and Peter Wilt helped launch that, and Peter Wilt is, for all of his, he is a unique character within American soccer for sure, in the sense that he has a very specific niche that he fills. He's able to launch projects from the start. He's launched several clubs. He does a great job at the branding and the business operations side of a launch, and helping bring clubs to reality that have success off the pitch in ways that I think give me some hope that this initiative of him can create stability at a level that has not really had stability at. And I'm including USL in that in many ways, because USL now have brought Major League Soccer. USL is not the same as what they are, and there is a distinction there, right? So even though they're called Division II now and they're filling that role, I still don't view them in that Division II way. I view them as the AHL, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's going to work in those markets, but I think you do need that somewhat independent level, as Kartik was saying on Friday again, that is competing at a D2 level. And look, if one day comes and there is the ability to open up the pyramid, and we're decades away, I truly believe that, but you're going to, before that happens, you're going to need a stable second tier, and that really has not been a situation that's existed really ever.
No, exactly. All right, we're not going to find a solution today. We're not going to find a solution this year, and you know what? Probably not next year. But Duane, as always, you can give a follow to the show at Soccer Today SPN. You can follow Duane as well on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. Stay tuned for tomorrow's show, 10 a.m. We have an amazing guest schedule, and come back. We'll talk about the playoffs. We'll talk about a different point of view of those games. And, of course, we'll talk about the world of football with a soccer perspective. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.